Good morning. Hope you had a great day yesterday and a party in the evening. So I'll be introducing the Google of Web3 and how we're actually building it on Polkadot. I'm Branimir, one of the founders of OriginTrail, the company behind OriginTrail, Trace Labs, and also the CTO of the project. And even though I'm the CTO, I'll try not to go too technical so that we can sort of make this presentation a little more understandable and what it actually means to be the Google of Web3. So I'll actually start with a very quick introduction into the problem. So if we consider Web2 and the Google of Web2, the cornerstone of all of these basic models behind such big, let's say, projects that collect like huge amounts of data like Google or Facebook or any social network is essentially that what they're really doing is extracting a ton of value from data. So Web2 is really about this. How do you get a ton of data, extract some value out of it, and then use it for your own purposes, right? And the kind of like the three building blocks or principles of this is, first, you have some sort of identifier, right? To identify a resource, web page, whatever type of service, which are basic URLs, so google.com. We had like algorithms, of one of which is the very common one is web search. So any type of search, be Google search, or if you're on some website, or let's say GitHub, you're doing some sort of search. Basically, that's very common thing and really used to explore the web, to discover things on it. And finally, as you all know, Web2 has this read-write paradigm, right? So there's no ability to own something. So that basically means you rent URLs, you don't own them. All of these algorithms are proprietary, hidden somewhere. And they're actually, when I say search algorithms, you can also think of it as like your Twitter feed, for example. I guess you guys know that your Twitter feed is sort of tailored with the Twitter algorithm to sort of drive you towards certain outcomes. So the point being is that all of these are in some way discovery algorithms, search algorithms, like basically giving you the search results of people who you follow or people who you're friends with on Facebook or in Google when you type a search term. Basically, it's kind of like the same thing. And in the end, this whole read-write paradigm, it's really questionable. We all know about the benefits of decentralization and verifiability in that sense, verifiability of data, like having the ability to trust something that you have actually read. For example, some data from on-chain obviously doesn't exist in Web2. So basically, all of this is kind of out of our hands, and actually, as you all know, not in the control. We're not there. So ideally, we move from this extraction of value from data towards a different paradigm, actually moving from data to assets, and actually creating those assets that we own for us, so that ideally we have some user node identifiers, things like you've seen, for example, from Kilt, the Web3 name, or other types of identifiers. So something like this, we want to have that as a building block. We want to have asset discovery as opposed to basic search algorithms. So we want to have the ability to run these algorithms on a decentralized, permissionless environment. And then finally, we want to have the read-write-own paradigm, right? We want to own all of this, the infrastructure, the assets, the actual algorithms. So the idea is you own the identifiers, you basically control of the algorithms, you manage and you trade your assets. So that's where we want to be, right? And that's what we want to see the Google of Web3 become. So at OriginTrail, we're actually, our mission is to organize humanity's assets, make them discoverable, verifiable, and valuable. And I'll actually give you a bit of an intro in how we're already doing that. OriginTrail is quite a kind of an old project in the sense of Web3 space. It's been around since 2013. We actually started building quite some time ago in the supply chain space, tracking physical assets, enabling discovery of them. And then 2017, we actually went fully decentralized, open sourced everything we built, launched on Ethereum, then moved to a couple of other blockchains, Gnosis, XDAI, and finally now launching our parachain Polkadot, which I'll talk a little bit more later. But essentially, it's always been a mission to actually enable discovery of different physical or digital assets. And one example of that I'm very proud to show today, I hope the video will run soon, is actually how we're tracking already over 30,000 assets which are in the pharmaceutical space for over 30,000 of patients receiving donated medicines in India. So I'll give you a better hint than through a short video. So what you've seen is really a glimpse of a solution called AidTrust. We have Trace Labs, the core developers of OriginTrail, built this in partnership with BSI, the British Standards Institution. And you see small screenshot here, basically showing events in the pharmaceutical supply chain. This is live in production, working on OriginTrail right now, and tracking pharmaceuticals from companies such as Bayer, Pfizer, being donated all the way to India from the US. Actually, it already uncovered some major troubles in the supply chain. One of the reasons why this was interesting for these companies was they actually were able to discover diversions. So there's a lot of these medicines basically getting stolen and sold on the black market. So having the ability to track and discover where these assets are, what's going on in the supply chain, actually helps the right people get the medicine that they have been donated to in the first place and not getting it, or not even getting it outside some sort of black market. So this is just one of the examples. It's applicable across the pharmaceutical supply chains, but there's many other things we also built together with BSI. Swiss Railway Company is one of the companies that actually uses OriginTrail to track their assets, physical assets. But essentially, I'll go ahead and explain how they do it. But when you think of it in terms of what it means to track those physical assets, it actually means that you're able to do a search. So you take something, you can identify it by some identifier, right? You can do a search, and you can find where it is, what it is, who owns it, and so on. So how do we do this? Essentially, right now there's very few assets compared to the amount of all of the assets that are going to come into Web3. Right now, what we're all doing is just the tip of the iceberg. And actually, it's going to get like much bigger. As Oscar said, the value of metaverse is going to be huge. So we need to bring these assets to Web3. We need to make them discoverable, verifiable, and valuable. And how do we do that? So how do we get all of humanity's assets into Web3? What type of technology do we need? So I'll make a case that we need two types of technology to work together. First one, you can probably guess it, it's a blockchain, right? But specifically why? Blockchains we see really as trust networks. So they're networks that you can basically build a ton of things on. You guys know all of this, so I'll go quickly through it. But basically, they're tamper-proof share ledgers, essentially stateful protocols. Great for decentralized identity, great for things like NFTs, any type of asset tokenization, decentralized finance. I know I'm preaching to the choir here. Basically, any type of generalized, trusted, multi-party computation. Maybe not any type, but you can do quite a lot. What you cannot really do so well is you cannot use a blockchain as a great database. I'm sure you guys know this already. So if you want to query, like as a developer, you want to do some sort of select query on a blockchain, it's really hard. You can kind of fetch who owns a certain NFT or what's been the history of some address. You can sort of fetch a block, but if you want to get some sort of a little more complex question going, you need to use some other tool. And there's actually projects, people sitting around here who are actually indexing blockchains, allowing you to query certain smart contracts for events and so on. But essentially, so they're great as trust networks, not so great as databases in that sense that we're used to. However, great databases actually are knowledge graphs, and there are something called entity networks, semantic networks. So what does that mean? Basically, it connects entities via some relationships to each other. And Google coined this term knowledge graph, actually. They said, the simplest way to explain it, it's things, not strings. So we're no longer talking about strings in some database table or column or whatever, or a document-based database. Actually, it's about really going the next level, moving from data to actual entity or an asset, and going to something that they call knowledge. Knowledge meaning that it's semantically enriched, wrapped data. So this basically gives you the best structure to get the value out of your data. And guess what? In Web 2, it's the thing that they're using. So Google uses it, Facebook uses it, Netflix uses it. If you don't maybe know it, but you've been using it. Anytime Netflix recommends you a video, it comes from a knowledge graph. Amazon recommends you something to buy, comes from a knowledge graph. You do a Google search for, I don't know, Albert Einstein, that thing on the right pops up with his information, his name, birth date, and picture, actually indicating that he's a person. That's from a knowledge graph. NASA uses knowledge graphs as well. And they are these like huge data mesh networks which actually connect entities and via relationships. Why is this really cool? Because if you want to extend it, for example, with something new, you just add another entity and create some relation to other things that it's related to. It can be an NFT that connects with some wallet. It can be like whatever type of entity. You can get them all connected together very extensively. And then you can ask questions to the graph. You can be like, which things are connected to some other thing? Or who is 2 hops away from me? Or who do you follow? You can think of it in terms of like, let's say, a social graph. You guys are probably familiar with that concept. So essentially, they're all very good candidates for knowledge graphs. So combining these two is actually what we do at OriginTrail. So we synergize blockchains and knowledge graphs. And we have something pretty simple like this. Actually, it's not that simple, but we made it like look a little simpler for this presentation. So at the bottom layer, we have this layer 1, which is multiple blockchains. And as I said, we're about to launch one on Polkadot. It's launched, but about to integrate with OriginTrail. And layer 2 is this decentralized knowledge graph. So think of a knowledge graph that's hosted on a decentralized, completely permissionless network, which is not a blockchain because it operates in a different way. It offers different services, and it doesn't have consensus, but it utilizes blockchain for consensus. On top of which, obviously, you can build all kinds of Web3 applications, and Google search is just one of them, one of the things that you can really easily build on top of such infrastructure. So, briefly mentioning the bottom layer, sounds wrong, but it's actually the most important layer. Blockchain is used to provide identity, trusted identity, and the ability to actually own and transact between assets, while the assets themselves could rely anywhere. They can be physical, they can be digital, they can even be parts of the graph. So what we're introducing actually with this new version of OriginTrail that's coming out very recently, in about a month from now, is actually the ability that you own your search result from the graph. So imagine now you type something into Google, you get your search result for a name, let's say. That's not something you own. But here in this case, you will be able to own it. You will be able to own the search result of your NFT or of your project, whatever, however you want it to be displayed. And then obviously you can index it to different keywords, kind of like with any other search engine. On the blockchain though, on the blockchain level, you're able to actually prove this ownership to any type of smart contract. You can transact with these graph assets and basically use them to extend any existing asset. Think of your NFT having an attached database, attached graph to it. Think of your wallet having the extensive graph of, let's say, credentials collected from various locations, kind of like, for example, from the credentials coming from Kilt wallet. So all of these things can be interconnected. And using the OriginTrail parachain, it's very easy to interact with all of the Polkadot world due to Polkadot's great design and interoperability capabilities. So apart from that, it's also going to be a very tailored blockchain for the decentralized knowledge graph. So it's not a general purpose blockchain. It's going to be optimized for the execution of graph algorithms, especially in something called graph contracts. So essentially think of, if you're an engineer, you probably ran into a graph problem at some point. The graph problem, like for example, graph traversal or shortest path, like in Google Maps. Well, these things will be very easily doable in graph contracts on the OriginTrail parachain. So basically, what we end up with is we end up with supercharged assets in the Web3. So we go from URLs to UALs, uniform asset locators, basically your Web3 URL. It's the difference with the original URL is that this one actually connects the identifier from blockchain and the identifier from the graph, which can point to anywhere, and you own it. You're able to transact it. You're able to put anything on it. Nobody can take it from you. User-controlled search. The algorithm that you're running to search is just a search query. You can write that query if you're a developer. If not, you can actually pick whatever type of search provider runs a query for you. And in that sense, you can query the graph and touch anything that's indexed in the graph. Finally, we get to the read-write own paradigm, because you can write into the graph, you can read from it, you can own parts of the graph and transact it. So we get new Web3 asset URLs, we get assets that are discoverable, and we get Web3 asset knowledge graphs. Every NFT you own can have its own knowledge graph. Very easily, very, very cheap, actually. So here's a glimpse of how that will look like. All right, so what you've just seen is a glimpse of what's to come. We're about to launch OriginTrail version 6 on the OriginTrail parachain early August. You'll be able to index into this Google Web3 your existing and future assets. You'll be able to make them discoverable, verifiable through these search algorithms, and obviously extend their value, supercharge the value that they already have. So I invite you to get involved. Check out the other materials that we have on OriginTrail. Follow our website at origintrail.io. And yeah, let's build the Google of Web3 together. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Branimir. We actually got a few questions in here, 4 or so. How does OriginTrail connect entities to Web3 exactly?
Come again?
Connect entities.
Entities. Oh, okay. Yeah. Very good question. So, not to go too technical, but essentially, OriginTrail uses the technology that comes from the originating idea of semantic web. If you guys have ever heard of it, actually, Tim Berners-Lee, who is behind the World Wide Web, introduced this idea back about 20 years ago. Originally coined the term Web3. But back then, they didn't know about like stuff we know today. And I think actually, personally, that's the reason why semantic web never really took off. However, it did take off in Google and all these companies that are using it in the form of knowledge graphs. So what comes from this movement is a lot of standards, W3C standards, such as RDF for basically organizing these graphs, Sparkle for querying, which looks a lot like SQL, JSON LD, you probably ran into some of that. That basically is one-to-one translatable to RDF. So OriginTrail uses these standardized technologies. We didn't reinvent the wheel. We didn't take anything that's like proprietary. It's basically compatible with all existing knowledge graphs. So even we will enable querying the Google knowledge graph through the OriginTrail knowledge graph. It's possible. You can pick those results. So in a way, merging Web2 and Web3 in that sense.
Awesome. And then considering the amount of assets you would need to index, is OriginTrail conceived as a multi-chain product?
Yes. So it's multi-chain from the inception of it. We believe that it needs to be a layer that connects, so you're able to actually create these relationships between entities, so you're able to query them. And right now it runs basically on 3 chains. It's going to extend to Polkadot via the OriginTrail parachain as the 4th one. And from the beginning, that's why Polkadot was such a great fit for our vision, because we were never about not even maximalist, but never about actually going into a specific chain and closing in the solution, because it doesn't work. Google actually indexes the whole internet. OriginTrail, as the Google Web3, has to index the whole Web3 space. That's basically it.
Wonderful. And why do you think big knowledge players like Wolfram and Wiki haven't been more Web3 forward?
It's a good question. We were actually at the Knowledge Graph conference a couple of months ago in New York City with a bunch of the players from the space. Everybody's pretty much there. Like Meta was there, Neo4j was there, Google, everybody. And I think they're still yet to discover Web3. A lot of the stuff we're talking about here, when we kind of present it to them, it feels a little strange. I think it's a different type of a community. It's very academic and very focused on their own thing, which is a great advantage for us because we're able to build something here together and enhance what they already been built over there. But I have no doubt, absolutely, that Web3 is moving into this space, and happy to be one of the first people who are actually pushing this forward. So
Yeah, exciting. We're happy to have you on Polkadot. I could, for sure, definitely.
Absolutely. It has to. Fantastic.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Branimir.
Thank you, guys.